Look at a map of Australia, and you see millions of square kilometers of empty space. It's among the least densely populated nations on Earth. Yet, relative to what people earn, Australia now sits alongside Hong Kong as the world's most unaffordable housing market. This chart shows the standard economic measure for housing affordability, the price-to-income ratio. A healthy market sits at about 3 times the median household income. Australia's national average has climbed to 8 times what people earn, and in Sydney, that number now sits at 13 times the median income. Do the math on those figures, and the reality becomes stark. A nurse and a school teacher, combining 2 solid salaries, can pool their savings and still find themselves boxed out of buying a modest, decades-old suburban home. These properties routinely cross the $1 million threshold at weekend auctions. A disconnect this extreme doesn't happen by accident. We didn't suddenly run out of land. This market is an economic machine, built over decades. The first gear in that machine was installed in 1999. That year, the Australian government introduced a 50% capital gains tax discount for individuals selling an investment property. This diagram illustrates how that discount combines with a rule known as negative gearing. Negative gearing allows property investors who lose money on rent each month to write those losses directly off their everyday salary. An investor can lose cash on a mortgage all year, reduce their tax bill in the process, and then eventually sell the home for a massive, lightly taxed payout. Because the tax code absorbs the financial pain of holding a mortgage, investors are incentivized to keep buying. They show up to auctions and outbid first home buyers for the exact same entry-level properties, knowing their losses will be subsidized by the government. The Australian tax system rewards citizens for holding property they have no intention of living in, directly pushing prices out of reach for people who just want a roof over their heads. But an investment engine only drives prices up if the commodity is scarce. Across Australia's major cities, housing supply is tightly controlled. In fact, the homes people love most, like these middle-density terrace houses, are now functionally illegal to build in large parts of Sydney and Melbourne. Swaths of in-demand land near city centres are locked down by strict height limits, minimum lot sizes, and heritage overlays. These rules effectively ban the construction of townhouses and low-rise apartments in the areas where jobs and infrastructure actually exist. The power to approve new developments sits largely with local councils. Those councils are elected by existing residents who have a strong financial incentive to object to any new construction, keeping neighborhood supply low so their own property values continue to climb. The narrative that Australia has a land shortage is a mirage. What it actually has is artificial regulatory scarcity, maintained to protect entrenched local wealth. Into this restricted market, you add a demand shock. Australia has maintained one of the highest percentage population growth rates in the developed world, driven heavily by hundreds of thousands of new arrivals per year, all competing for that exact same pool of housing. The final accelerant was the credit supply. Following financial deregulation in the 1980s, and amplified by a decade of historically low interest rates in the 2010s, banks opened the floodgates, offering massive mortgages to almost anyone who asked. This chart shows how buyers utilized those lower interest rates. They didn't use them to save money on monthly payments. Instead, they used the cheaper rates to borrow larger sums, immediately bidding those extra dollars straight into the purchase price. Today, total national housing debt has ballooned past $2.5 trillion. When you force a rapidly growing population into a legally constrained housing supply and hand the buyers access to unlimited cheap credit, hyperinflated property values aren't an anomaly, they are a mathematical certainty. This machine functions exactly as designed, and it is lucrative for those already inside it. Existing homeowners have watched their net worth multiply without effort. Investors continue to extract tax advantages, and state governments rake in enormous revenues through stamp duty taxes every time a home changes hands. The cost is borne entirely by those on the outside. An entire generation of young Australians and lifelong renters are watching housing costs wildly outpace their wages. Without access to parental wealth, the prospect of ever owning a home is structurally closed off to them. The mechanisms to fix this are understood by economists. The government could wind back the capital gains discount on existing properties, States could override local zoning laws to allow high-density development near transit hubs, and direct investment in public housing could provide a baseline alternative to the private market. Yet, these solutions sit largely untouched. Roughly a third of the Australian voting public owns an investment property. There is no political appetite for a government to intentionally devalue its own voters' single largest financial asset. Australia has priced its national dream for a select few. This outcome confirms that land was never the scarce resource. The political courage to change the rules was.